Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or much good depending on your location. Please join in the struggle to liberate our people from the contraption. Like and share videos. Happy Sunday. Today is Ori Market. I bring you the news updates. We are Africans, not just blacks, Ned Walker declares, as he condemns the terminology that simplifies the rich tapestry of Africa, demands $5 trillion reparation from the former colonial powers. That was the senator representing Delta North Senatorial District, Ned Walker, has called on Europeans, particularly those that were involved in the colonialization of Africa. Yes, he said, look, that they should reparate $5 trillion to African nations for the activities during the colonial era. That's the activities of the colonial masters when they were colonizing Africa. Yes, he also condemned the usage of blacks to address Africans. As he said, the Americans are addressed as Americans, and people in Europe are being addressed as Europeans, Asians, and so why should it be just blacks? To simplify the rich tapestry of Africa, said, look, we are people of honor and dignity, that's Africans. That's what Ned Walker is saying. He's making a strong case for Africa. He said, look, even the artifacts that were stolen, he said, look, the people in charge in European countries where these artifacts are themselves should bring it back in full. Let me quote part of his statement. Quote, I call for reparations of at least $5 trillion, not as an act of vengeance, but a pathway to healing and restoration. We must establish a comprehensive framework for reparations to assess the damages inflicted by centuries of injustice. I call upon former colonial masters and the international community to acknowledge the grave consequences of this historical injustice and African nations, especially Nigeria, and expressly apologize to the countries and peoples of the continent. Britain and other colonial powers must eventually address the specific wrongdoings and blatant rape of Africa's peoples and exploitation of their resources. It is not enough to issue blanket statements as tokens to assuage their conscience. It would entail addressing the specific atrocities visited on the diverse peoples of the continent and implementing the regimes of reparations commensurate with the damage done to each African territory and its people. It would be imperative for the colonial powers to rethink and adjust the dynamics of their relationship with African territories that still struggle with the active after effects of their atrocities. I beseech former colonial masters to invest in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic empowerment within African nations, especially those that have endured exploitation. I also urge the reparation of culturally significant artifacts taken from the African continent during the colonial period. In recent years, there have been a few instances of selective return of stolen artifacts to the Benin Kingdom. However, what justice demands is a wholesome restoration of these items to the peoples and places from which they were forcefully and illegally removed them from. I also challenge the terminology that simplifies the rich tapestry of Africa into a simple label, blacks, especially when used in a derogatory and abusive manner. If they refer to people from the Asian continent as Asians, Europeans, Americans, then they should refer to people from Africa as Africans, not blacks. Unquote. Now, Ned Walker is making a case for African nations. First, he said, look, for the atrocities and injustice committed during the colonial era, that these powers, superpowers that have done this, they should reparate about $5 trillion to African nations. He said it's not vengeance, it's seeking, rather, it's talking about healing the wounds of the old, our past. He said there are some instances where the European powers or the Americans, they are giving aids, particularly those involved in colonialists or colonial era. They are giving aids and grants to African nations. He said this transcends beyond aids and grants. Yes, so considering the level of injustice meted on African nations during that period, said $5 trillion should be given to African nations for this healing to take effect. They also talk about the artifacts. Say, look, there are some level of repatriations of these artifacts we have seen. The Benin, particularly the cockerel, the ones they recently brought back to Benin Kingdom. He said this demands a wholesome reparation of these cultural artifacts. They should bring them back completely, not just haphazard. That's the stance of Senator Ned Nwoko. He also talked about the derogatory expression of blacks against Africans. So look, that when people are calling Africans blacks, that indeed the color is black. But where you will make use of that word, it will seem you are using it in a derogatory way, blacks. All right. And so he's talking about the honor, the dignity of the African man, so it should be upheld in the international community. Yes, if we must, live in peace and remain one in our world today. If humanity is one indeed, there must be respect, and mutual respect must be adhered to. There must be understanding, and mutual understanding must be strictly adhered to. That's the stance of Senator Ned Nwoko. And we appreciate him for that, yes. The Europeans that have come to Africa, and they have taken the resources of Africans during the colonial era, it has come and gone. But these things have still psychological effect on the African people. Yes. And so that is what the Ned Nwoko is asking the Europeans to address this issue of exploitation during the colonial period. But the worst is still this fact that there are still accusations against European powers about still the neocolonialism and the exploitation of the African nations currently going on. That is the most worrisome aspect of it. I think the countries like France are supposed to come out openly and denounce this kind of allegation being leveled against them, because there are in some quarters we see this allegation is very strong against former colonial entities that are still in the business of colonizing Africans. So this is what Ned Nwoko is pointing at. Yes, but we have ways for African leaders. Since the independence of these African nations, what have they achieved? They are independent. The Europeans have left them for decades. So they have the ample time, the opportunity to re-establish themselves. Like the case in Nigeria. You have seen the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorate. You have seen that this thing was done by Britain for administrative convenience. For you to achieve your goals and your dreams and fulfill your destinies as human beings and as a people, a continent, a nation, Nigeria is supposed to have re-established itself or herself and tell themselves the honest truth and say, look, we are not going to lump ourselves together in this manner for even development. Therefore, let us call for separation. Let's go our separate ways. Let people stay in their component units and their regions and make on their own country. By so doing, these countries will develop like the ones we have in Europe. Yes. So that is the area the African leaders have failed woefully. And so we are calling upon Nigeria government today to tell that part, re-establish itself and call for a referendum where people of diverse tongues, ethnic nationalities will come together and say, look, this is what we want. We want to stay in Nigeria. We want to opt out of Nigeria. And that is the point the Biafrans has been making. Yes, and that's why Mazen Amkan is intention for solidarity, because it's called for referendum for Biafrans to decide whether to stay in Nigeria. Since the federal government of Nigeria has refused to call for, sovereign national conference where people will come and said, oh, whether I want to stay in this, forced marriage or want to opt out, they have refused to do that. If they call national conference, they will say these are gray areas, no gray areas. Don't talk to this. Don't mention these areas. Our unity is sacrosanct. It's non-negotiable. Okay. Now Mazen Amkan said, let Biafrans go, conduct referendum for us, since we cannot do it as a whole, as a country. And that is the problem. So we are still calling on them to come and do that needful. That's European powers. That's the best way to assuage this, emotions and everything.